month's edition of Slugger TV. In this episode, we're going to be going through the many crises within the DUP. And to go through this topic, we have the former special advisor and now political commentator, Mr. Tim Cairns, and we have the political commentator, Sarah Creighton. You're both very welcome. Thank you so much for taking time out of this busy melodrama that we've seen within the Democratic Unionist Party. So, Tim, I want to go to you first. Man, what is happening in your grand old party, your former parish? What is happening?
Well, it's pretty unbelievable. I think it's fair to say, first off, I mean, nobody would have thought what happened to Edwin Poots would possibly could have happened. Look, I think, you know, the seeds of his downfall were really set by himself, unfortunately. I mean, if you look at it, his plan to seize power was almost a perfect plan, perfectly executed. I know Arlene Foster feels very sore about that, and it was certainly brutal and swift in the way that it was done. The difficulty, I think, for Edwin was once he won power, he had no plan of what to do next. And it was just one series of missteps after the other. Look, this is something I've said quite a bit over the last few weeks. And I think this plays out in politics across the world. The person who's considered to be the hardliner is always the person who can't take the hardline position. The person who's considered to be the softer person is the person who can take the hardline position. I mean, we saw it with David Trimble, of course. You know, David Trimble in 1985, and lots of comparisons have been made between David Trimble and Edwin Poots. I don't think David Trimble would like to have any comparisons made between the two of them, but there have been lots of comparisons made. But don't forget, David Trimble came in 95 as the hardline candidate, and then when he actually got into power and as things worked out, he was the much softer line person. It was very difficult to be that hardline person when you're in office, if that's what is expected of you. And I think Edwin Poots fell foul of that a little bit. And I think that's what really last week was all about. You know, Edwin felt he had no other option other than to nominate a first minister because he would be expected to be the person who was going to bring things crashing down. Where if you remember back to the election campaign, Jeffrey Donaldson was the hardline person. He was the one who was saying he was prepared for an election. He was prepared to bring things down over the protocol, over the Irish language. He was prepared to play Irish language off the protocol. And when push came to shove, Edwin Poots wasn't.
Okay. Sarah, what have you made from the outside? I know you're looking at the UR unions, but you're looking at this from outside the fold. So what have you made of what we've seen with the DUP?
Oh, it's been great television, great entertainment. I mean, I couldn't believe it when you know, this whole thing came crashing down. I woke up on Thursday and the Secretary of State was saying he was going to pass this cultural package, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is a whole change. And you know, I basically thought, oh, well, hopefully that'll resolve everything, and then everything just came crashing down, burning within one day. You know, it is incredible, as Tim says, that it has gotten this far. I think really this has just been an absolute disaster for the DUP from the get-go. From back when they deposed Arlene Foster and Creighton, didn't have a plan about what they were going to do when they got a new leader in, and then the new leader coming in and making mistake after mistake after mistake. And I think, you know, Tim is right. You know, he was the hardline candidate. When he came in, he realised he couldn't be hardline. And I think that's because the truth, it actually is quite difficult to be hardline in that power, because it's a power sharing system. You have to compromise when you get in there. And I think, you know, the huge problem has been that some people aren't prepared to compromise and some people are. But I think really Edwin's big mistake seems to have been not talking to the party when he got this deal done. You know, that he basically got the deal done with the Secretary of State. They didn't talk to the people in the DUP and went ahead and approved it, and they didn't want them to, and that was the calamity that brought him down. But I think it's going to take a long time for the party to recover from this. I worry about the future from this, essentially, because you know, who knows what Jeffrey's going to do when he comes in, what's going to happen going forward. But I really think, you know, apart from its entertaining purpose, there is a depressing point to this, and the fact that I don't think this is very good for Northern Ireland at all.
Mm-hmm. And Tim, just on that, I mean, so seriously, I mean, as we analyse the 3 or it'll probably be 4 weeks by the time he actually formally exits the leadership of the DUP tenure of Edwin Poots, I mean, it's even amazing that we're even saying that. What for you was the Rubicon crossing moment in that leadership? What was the point of no return? Was it the nominating of the First Minister? Was it even doing the deal with Brandon Lewis? Or was it the fact, maybe, was it his ministerial choices? What was the Rubicon crossing moment, do you think?
Well, I think Sarah was pretty much on it there in what she was saying. I think really 2 things were the big problem. One, he didn't take advice. I mean, it was very stark, very, very stark to anybody watching this, that the only person who came to meetings with Edwin Poots was Paul Givan. There was nobody else. Now, Arlene Foster was criticised by the MLAs because there was 5, 6, 7 people around her, a couple of advisors, a chief executive, a press officer, and a couple of very close elected representatives who went to meetings with her and made the decisions. And people complained about that. MLAs felt they were shut out from that. But Edwin Poots came in and said, well, I'm going to do it differently. You're going to have a voice. You're going to be listened to. You're going to be heard. And what we actually saw was things getting worse. Instead of advisors and close confidants who were elected representatives, what we saw was Edwin Poots surrounding himself with 1, maybe 2 people. I think Ian Paisley Jr. was giving advice, but he wasn't publicly accompanying him to meetings. It was Paul Given and Edwin Poots, and they were the only people who were involved in any decision making. But I also think the other problem that Edwin had was in nominating his executive and his chairmanships and his vice chairmanships, that Tuesday, I think, where he kept on coming up and down the stairs, getting his steps up. I don't know if he has a Fitbit and he's trying to get his steps up, but it did seem quite a bizarre spectacle. But I think not reaching out to the other side of the party, that was a huge, and actually I think in more ways that was probably the deeper mistake, because I think people at that point in time were sort of thinking, right, what's really going on here? There is no effort to reach out. There is no effort to make healing and bring healing about. And people were, I was on talkback that day, and people were, from the other side of the party, so to speak, were texting me saying, like, this is ridiculous. This is a disgrace. There is no effort to reach out at all. And I think, people, particularly in the middle of the party, although some of them did get quite senior positions, I think they looked at that and probably thought, this isn't a good way to do business. So I think those two things, not taking any advice from anybody other than Paul Given, and then not reaching out across the divide, really, I think MLAs were looking at that and they were thinking, look, things haven't got any better here. In fact, they've got worse, because Edwin Poots isn't someone who's going to electorally deliver, and he's not listening to us, and he's not taking advice. So it's even worse than it was under Arlene Foster.
Mm-hmm. Sarah, do you think, though, for the incoming leader, for the leader coming in as we're recording, no one has actually formally declared yet, but we're all expecting Jeffrey Donaldson to throw his hat in the ring. Do you think this has made his job harder or easier? Does this give him more authority coming in as leader, or does it make the new leader's job harder? What's gone on in the past 4 to 5 weeks?
I think it makes it easier for him to stamp his authority, because, like somebody described to me that the previous few weeks is a shit show. So I think that Jeffrey's going to be seen as coming in here, trying to fix this, trying to make this better, provide order and stability. And I think he's going to be able to say, look, I'm going to be able to move forward with this. But I think the problems he's going to face are exactly the same. He's still going to have the same problems here, which is he going to move forward on the language legislation or not? Is he going to nominate for First Minister when that opportunity arises, when Paul Given steps down? I think it's going to be very, very difficult for him. But I do think that the DUP are delaying the inevitable here if they are going to double down on the language legislation. And quite recently, there's been a lot of talk now that it's going to be about the protocol, not the language legislation going forward. But that problem is still there. What is he going to do? And I think he should just get on with it and approve it and just agree to it. That's what you agreed to last year.
And Tim, just on this, because in terms of where the DUP go from here, do they do a bit like a Dallas Bobby Ewing type thing, death thing here? Basically, the aberration, Lee Reynolds was writing in the Irish News about the Edwin Poots aberration. What do they do? Do they just try and scrub that this ever happened? So we've read over the weekend that Paul Given is going to go as First Minister, and the consensus was up until that point that, well, no, he might keep Paul Given in as first, but that's clearly not going to happen. And Paula Bradley is deputy leader. What are you hearing? What's your sense about what will happen?
Well, there's no vacancy in the deputy leader's position. So I think unless Paula resigns, her position can't be re-elected or in any way interfered with until next year at the AGM. So I think Paula Bradley's probably safe if she wants to stay in that position. And I haven't heard anything to suggest that she doesn't. I think the way this is played is basically, I think you're absolutely right. Oh, what a horrible dream. Glad that's over. It's a bit like, that Basil Fawlty scene where he ruffles his hair up and, oh, what a horrible dream. And as Sybil comes back from her weekend away. and just let's just pretend anything that you thought it was happening hasn't happened at all. And I think that's the case. It is like, sort of Dallas. I saw a few people saying that on Twitter. It's going to be, Bobby Ewing walking out of the shower, and the last 3 or 4 months, haven't mattered at all. And I think in many ways that's got to be the way it's played, because Jeffrey Donaldson, when he comes in to the office on Saturday, needs to get ahead of this, needs to get out there, needs to get beyond that, needs to show that he has a plan, show that he's going to be a strong, steady leader. He's going to steady the ship, and things are going to be okay from here on in. And I think he needs to do that, and needs to do that immediately. And I think he will have willing MLAs and MPs. Well, most of them will be willing MLAs and MPs, because I think they'll know, well, we can have one do-over, you can't have two.
Mm-hmm. And Sarah, just wanted to get your thoughts on, obviously, we saw Arlene Foster depart as First Minister formally. She has indicated, apparently well-placed sources close to her have said she's got no intention of actually making any return to local politics. I know there's some speculation that there may be an outreach to maybe bring her back as First Minister. She said she apparently indicated she's not interested in that. What have you made of her departure, and how she departed, and how we're kind of regarding that?
I think, she's had a bit of a new lease of life, hasn't she, over the past couple of weeks? I think it was because she was deposed so brutally that I think people had a bit of sympathy for her. And I think, the person that was incoming, people were like, oh, this is so terrible. I think they felt a bit sorry for her. And I mean, she showed a different side to her over the past couple of weeks. And, I think she's endeared herself to a lot of people. But I mean, we've talked about her so many times on this show for the past 5 years. She's been at the centre of mess for 5 years, particularly with Brexit and everything else. The woman's been at the head of it. Personally, I wish her best. But, the idea of her coming back, I think her time is gone. I think it's time for her to move on, put her feet up, and, I think we'll be discussing her for years and years. I'm not sure history will judge her well, actually, on the side of it. I think people will look back and she'll be seen as being responsible for a lot of mess, I think. But, I think she got the, I think it was nice to see a different side of it in the last couple of weeks. But yeah, I'm not like an Arlene convert,
Okay, so you're not such a Tim. You have the unique thing. You've actually worked with Arlene Foster. What did you make of her departure, formally going as First Minister, and just how she's kind of conducted herself, singing "That's Life" to Gareth Gordon?
Well, Arlene's a desperately complex character, I think, it's fair to say. And I think we've seen flashes of the Arlene Foster that we've seen over the last few weeks. We've seen flashes of that throughout her time in leadership. I think certainly early doors, let's not forget it was Arlene's candidates. It was all about Arlene. She was the fun candidate, dancing down the streets as she was canvassing. And certainly that was the height of Arlene Foster. I think we actually saw that coming back last March. The RHI inquiry delivered their report, and then COVID hit, and Arlene Foster seemed to be pretty popular again. We saw a different side to her, a side that was, serious, and a side that was commanding to her. And I think that people, if you look at the Lucid Talk polls, I mean, certainly her polling figures were rising, and people were saying that she was a competent politician. I think it's the bit in the middle is the problem. And I think, it's because of RHI, she started to retreat. And I think, she retreated back into Stormont Castle. And I actually think internally within the party, COVID was a difficulty for her. Because everything's done online, she retreated right back in to the ministerial office in Stormont Castle, or was staying in Fermanagh and wasn't visible to the party, even though the public felt she was doing a better job. So look, I don't think that I'm quite where Sarah is. I don't actually think history will judge Arlene Foster as badly as what possibly it should judge her. I think there's certainly a movement on right now certainly within the press, that Arlene Foster is being seen as some sort of reforming character who was let go because she was more liberal than the rest of her MLAs. I actually think that's complete and utter rubbish. I don't think that's why she's gone at all. I don't think she's some liberal, bastion of the liberal elite who is, cast aside by MLAs who were, waving the Bible in one hand and wielding a knife in the other. I really don't think that categorization of Arlene Foster and the DUP is accurate over the last few weeks. I think internally she had retreated away from her MLA core, had distanced herself from them, and that was what the outworking of this was. Arlene Foster was not some huge liberal on abortion and equal marriage and all of those things, and conversion therapy and the way she's being cast now. She might have been a little more liberal than some of her Free Presbyterian colleagues, but she wasn't. I don't think she'll be getting a job writing a column for Pink News or anything like that. She'll be, I think it's more likely that she'll be doing something with the UK government in terms of promoting the union and things like that. So I think this recasting of Arlene is probably a bit much, but I actually don't know that she was just as bad a leader as what some other people may want to say that she was.
Tim, what would you advise Edwin Poots to do? Should he move on from politics full stop and just give up his seat in his ministry, or should he stick around? What do you think should be the future for Edwin Poots?
It's very interesting that Jeffrey Donaldson, if what we're hearing in the press is right, Jeffrey Donaldson has contacted Edwin Poots immediately and spoken to him. It's quite the contrast from where Edwin Poots was at. Look, I think in the short term, I think it probably seems likely if Edwin Poots wants to remain as Agriculture Minister until the election, I think it's probably likely that will be offered to him and that will be given to him. I think that'll be a strong signal that, whatever grudges there are, whatever bad feeling there is, that it's starting to be buried. And I think that'll be a very important signal to send out. And I think Edwin Poots, if he cares about the DUP, would probably accept that offer if it was given, because I think it probably allows the party to heal. I think long term, I think it's going to be very difficult for him, let's say after an election, if he does stand as an MLA at the next election. I think it feels like it would be very difficult for him to be a minister long term. I think it would be very hard to recover from that. So I suppose Edwin Poots has a choice to make. Does he go to the backbench and be a voice of agitation on the backbench? I mean, there's a blueprint for that in the DUP. M. Paisley Jr. has been the voice of agitation on the backbench. So do they form a double act, Waldorf and Stadler, one in the Assembly, one in Westminster, criticising everything that happens in the maybe the slightly different show than what Sarah was mentioning, the Muppet Show that's happening in Northern Ireland politics? And is that what happens? I could actually see that being something that he may wish to do, is to be that voice from the backbench in the way that his good friend Ian Paisley has been in Westminster. Look, who knows? I think in the short term, he will probably accept the job as Agriculture Minister, stay there, and I think that'll be very powerful symbolically as the party comes back together. Long term, if he stays in the Assembly, he will be that voice. If he leaves, I mean, I suppose he can always go back to farming. I mean, that's his passion, and he still does that.
Okay. Sarah, what do you think the future for Edwin Poots is potentially?
It's difficult to say. I think it just depends on what he wants to do. I mean, getting kicked out as DUP leader within 21 days is humiliating. If it was me, I'd want to hide away for a very long period of time. But he's been in politics a long time. I suppose, if he wants to still be in the Assembly, be an MLA, a backbencher, I think is probably his best option at this point, or remain, become a minister and be Jeffrey's ally, really. And as Tim says, if the party's going to come together, maybe that's the role for the wing that voted for him. Maybe he needs to represent them in some way, even if he's not representing them as the leader. But obviously, in terms of politicians, obviously I would right-wing conservative politicians, I'm not huge fans of them in general, even as much, so, but I think it depends on what he wants to do. As I say, I'd book a holiday if it was me.
Okay. And Tim, I just wonder then, so obviously if Jeffrey Donaldson's going to be leader, he said in his previous election pitch, he's going to come back here. He is going to leave Westminster and come back here. I mean, if Edwin doesn't move on, there are two sitting MLAs there, and unless the DUP vote in Lagan Valley jumps by a good couple of percent, I'm not saying where does Jeffrey go to? What constituency does he go to? Where does he get a seat? Where do you think he goes?
Well, I suppose that there'd be a big decision for the party to make if Paul Given or Edwin Poots were to step aside at the Assembly election, or look, if Jeffrey, I think the DUP are likely to run 3 in the Assembly election in Lagan Valley, whatever happens. And I think, you'd imagine Jeffrey Donaldson wins one of those seats, and then whomever the loser is, the price for the lucky loser is to run for Westminster, perhaps. But I don't know if that's the greatest thing for the DUP. I think if the DUP are wanting to win that Westminster seat, I'm not sure that Edwin Poots and Paul Given are the best candidates. So I I think it's going to be very tricky for both Paul Givan and Edwin Poots as to what they do. I think if you look at it, and if previous elections are anything to go by, I think Edwin Poots is probably more likely to take the second seat than Paul Givan, but who knows? I mean, how has this damaged him? And has it damaged him so much that Paul Givan could take that seat? I do think, you know, it will be very, there's going to be some testy discussions there in Lagan Valley after the Assembly election if Givan, Poots and Donaldson all run.
Sarah, just in terms of, obviously there's the potential of a by-election obviously in Lagan Valley, and that is very much a fight between the Alliance Party, the DUP. You've got the Ulster Unionist Party did come third last time, but maybe if this beady bounce is anything to be believed, they could be a factor in this as well. What do you make of the dynamics of that, really? Because obviously that's a big test, not just for Jeffrey Donaldson, but also for the Alliance Party. Has their momentum stayed? And also for Doug Beattie as well?
It's going to be an interesting one. I mean, you can already see on social media the Ulster Unionists and the Alliance Party are at each other's throat on a daily basis. It's going to bother us all until the election next year. I think, you know, Saoirse Eastwood is I've seen Tim make the point on Twitter, you know, Lagan Valley is a very unionist constituency, but, you know, I think Alliance can capitalise on this chaos. I think Alliance can capitalise on the DUP being chaotic and political unionism in general. I think it's got a good argument here to say, look, you know, Ulster Unionist DUP, you need something different. And I think Saoirse Eastwood's well placed to take that seat if she can, but it is going to depend obviously on the dynamics of the other voters. So the Ulster Unionists are interesting because obviously Doug Beattie is going to be trying to win back some of those Liberal Alliance voters that maybe would have left the Ulster Unionists. And this is going to be a good outing for him to try that. So I don't see the Ulster Unionists being able to take the seat, but it's whether they can take those seats away from Alliance. And I think if the Ulster Unionists got a good showing in Lagan Valley against Alliance, I think they would be quite pleased with that. But I think that's the battle for Alliance there. And I think certainly if it was Edwin Poots or Paul Givan was to run, I think Saoirse Eastwood could very easily try and build momentum towards getting her to try and depose that seat from the DUP. So I think it's one to watch.
Okay, Tim, I saw again, you were putting the cat among the pigeons amongst some people on social media about how that it isn't as easy as some people might think for the Alliance Party. So, you know, being fair to unionists as we are here on Slugger TV, do you want to elaborate a wee bit on your thinking on that?
Well, I think that, you know, 65% of people who voted in the last election voted unionist. You know, and in previous elections, there was about 11%, which was a nationalist vote. Saoirse Eastwood gained about half of that nationalist vote at the last election. So if you didn't jump then, are you going to jump now? There's really only about 2,500-3,000 votes there. Now she needs 6,500 to get beyond Jeffrey Donaldson. So she's not going to take it from nationalists. So even if the SDLP and Sinn Féin don't stand, there's still only about 3,000 votes there for her to mop up to try and get past Jeffrey Donaldson, or get past the DUP. She'd be about 3,500 behind. But look, the DUP's candidate selection here, I think, is crucial and absolutely utterly critical. And I think that if they get their candidate selection wrong, I think you could see the Ulster Unionists or the Alliance Party getting enough votes to get past the DUP total. But I do still think that's unlikely, provided the DUP select the right candidate. But, you know, there's what Lee Reynolds has called, you know, the Dromore effect, where, you know, the DUP get chipped to their left, get chipped to their right, and that brings them down sufficiently that one of the other parties could come through. I think Robbie Butler is someone who is very impressive. I think he's done a lot of good work. If you're a parent who's been going through the transfer process this year, as I have, I've been exceptionally impressed with Robbie Butler. I've bigged him up on Twitter quite a lot. So because of what he did, he really led on that issue. And I think we've seen Robbie has led on a lot of other issues as well. And he's someone who's likable. I think he's plausible. I think he's someone who can present the right image. And as Sarah says, if there is the BD bounce, if that is a real thing, I think you could see Robbie Butler doing very well. I certainly wouldn't discount him, but I still think it is the DUP's to lose. There's been a lot of talk about Saoirse Eastwood. There's been a lot of talk about her likability, and she's somebody who does use Twitter very well. But being a Twitter personality and then that translating into being an electable personality are two different things. I think she's probably gone about as far as she can to gain votes from the DUP and from nationalists on Twitter. I think she now has to be shown to be able to extend beyond that. So that will mean they will really have to push her on the media. And is she going to be as good a media performer as Naomi Long, as Stephen Farry? And I don't think she's going to be. I don't think she has that strength and that ability yet. Could she be media savvy and impressive in the media? I think she could, but I think in the media performances that certainly I've heard and seen so far, she just isn't at that level yet. So I think, Robbie Butler has that experience. I think if the DUP put up the right candidate with that experience, I think she will be exposed.
Well, what about that? Because this is what I was just thinking. Obviously, someone who during the Poots kind of leadership who spoke out to him was Brenda Hale, former DUP MLA in that constituency. And again, she didn't leave the party, but she spoke out against the treatment of Arlene Foster. Now Jeffrey's back. I mean, would it make sense for him to reach out to her and maybe say to her, because the DUP aren't exactly, women for the unionist parties is a problem. Doug Beattie has acknowledged that within the Ulster Unionist Party. It's been a problem within the DUP. Would that make sense to him to reach out to her as a potential candidate?
Certainly her name has been floated about in the last couple of days as a potential for the by-election if and when Jeffrey comes back. And I think, she's certainly a plausible candidate. She's someone who's held elected office. She is very close to Jeffrey Donaldson. She has that sort of military background through her family. I think she had, someone who's well known in sort of the middle class areas of the constituency. They're the areas that she particularly served. Royal Hillsborough is where she's from. So I think that she's somebody who's well placed, well liked, quite popular. So would have that chance, I think, to have the right profile. But I think there's going to be so much attention on this by-election. The only worry I have for her is the same worry that I have for Saoirse Eastwood. Does she have the media presence? Because I think, if there's a by-election, let's say in October, the media are going to descend on Lagan Valley. You're going to have talkback specials, the View special, Sunday politics, really focused on that constituency. And I think it is going to be a media battle. Twitter is not going to save you in that battle. You're going to have to be media strong, media sound, be able to withstand Mark Carruthers, William Crawley, Stephen Nolan, all of these people. And, I think there's an opportunity for Robbie Butler. I think he is someone who has more experience in the media, has performed quite well, I think, in the media over the last year or so. And I think he's someone who could actually gain some of those votes. So I think it'll be very interesting because there'll be no by-election in Northern Ireland where there'll be quite that scrutiny. It'll be a bit like going back to the Gavin Robinson, Naomi Long election, that Westminster election, where the whole focus of the Northern Ireland media was on those two candidates. Yeah. And Gavin Robinson, of course, was someone who is very strong in the media. Naomi Long is someone who's very strong in the media. So I think that media focus, both parties were able to shore up and hold their position. And I just think in Lagan Valley, the attention is just going to be so strong from a media perspective that really you've got to pick a candidate with that in mind.
Yeah, and that Slugger O'Toole debate in East Belfast in 2015 was decisive, I think.
Can I just come into that? Just because, as I say, look, I've no skin in the game, as you say. I've kind of got to the cynical point where I just want political parties to shut up and do their job. But I have been on talkback with Saoirse, and I did think she was very impressive. As you say, I take Tim's point. It's not just about Twitter. I think that's a huge mistake a lot of people make in politics these days. I think that just because somebody's big on Twitter that they'll win. No, they won't. But generally, with Saoirse, I think she does do quite well media-wise, and I do think certainly for women in the media, I think they come under so much pressure with appearances and everything like that. I absolutely think it's something that Saoirse can handle. The same with Brenda as well. I think people will rise to the occasion. And certainly, I think even meeting people on the doorstep, I think that's a huge thing as well. So I just want to say, I just feel like as I said, I've been with Saoirse on the radio before, and I did think she was quite good. I actually was really impressed with her.
Sarah, maybe you're announcing your candidature here, are you?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No.
Well, there's no point. There's no point in saying the political parties shut up and get on with your job if you're not prepared to do the job.
I would honestly, I have no interest in being a politician. No, absolutely.
You could be a SPAD. I mean, Tim, I'm sure, can vouch for the inevitable how great the job is.
I would rather be a SPAD than a politician. I would rather sit on the outside and throw spitballs to make them do what I think they want them to do. Really, I have no interest in politicians. I have just doing it is. It's because I can't toe a party line. I have my own view. Just I said to somebody the other day, I said, if you actually asked me, I'd probably you'd sack me within weeks because I'd be on Twitter saying how crap you were. So no, absolutely not.
What do you think about? I mean, Tim, I'll come to you because we're coming into our final few minutes. So if I can get some musings from both of you on this. Edwin didn't have a plan. You said at the start he didn't have a plan. Does Jeffrey have a plan?
Well, the Belfast Telegraph seem to think he has a grand plan. They've been leading with that story over the last few days. I think it almost is going to be Jeffrey's coming in at a perfect time because I think had he won the election, if a couple of MLAs had flipped their vote and Jeffrey had have won, I actually think he wouldn't be in as strong a position as he is now. I think when he comes in, most people can say, well, everything he does is going to be better than what happened before. He couldn't be worse. So I think he comes in with expectations being that little bit lower. And I think that allows him to undo the mistakes that Edwin did. I think all Jeffrey needs to do is look back at the 4 or 5 missteps that Edwin made over the last 4 or 5 weeks and then not repeat them. Reach out to the other side of the party, give positions to people who would be seen as Poots or Ian Paisley supporters, take advice, go into meetings with more people than just your closest ally and confidant. So almost Jeffrey just has to do those things and he'll be an immediate success. So I actually think in terms of the grand plan, he's trying to put the protocol as front and center in that rather than Irish language. And there's some speculation that he's had a tip and a wink from the government that they're going to do something. And if that's right, then he could look an immediate success in the first few weeks of leadership. So I think really for Edwin, the grand plan is don't do what Edwin did. And if Jeffrey can do that, then I think he comes out of this, looking quite strong.
Okay, Sarah, I want to give you the final word on this. Do you think Jeffrey has a plan, and if so, what is it you're thinking of the speculation that we're having about how he's going to approach the leadership?
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about Jeffrey's grand plan. I keep thinking of that West Wing scene where Josh Lyman talks about a secret plan to fight inflation. It wasn't actually a plan. But I feel like it's going to be get in there, get to the assembly. But I think before that, there's going to be a lot of movement around the First Minister and the nomination. It seems as though they're going to use this occasion to maybe try and put pressure on the British government in respect to the protocol, maybe even on the language legislation. And I think that's going to be the plan going forward. But I am concerned, I am worried that there's going to be a lot more shenanigans here and that possibly we're going to head for an early election. If they don't get what they want out of this, what they can get, I don't know. But I think he does need to have a plan going forward. But, as whether his plan is good or not, I think we'll wait and see. I just hope that they get their act together and make the right decisions and do the right thing for Northern Ireland and for unionism in general. But I think that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, winter election, goodness, we've got all that to look forward to. Potential by-election as well coming up as well. So it's been great. It's been all of 17 months since we've had an election in Northern Ireland, which is a bit of a record given our run of snap elections. Guys, thank you so very much for your insights. Sarah Creighton, Tim Cairns, we really appreciate it. There's been a lot to go through there. And I want to thank you, our audience, for tuning in and listening to us here on Slugger TV. You can keep up to date with everything else in the meantime on sluggerotoole.com. Thank you for watching.